The handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists before I even knew what was happening. Flashing red and blue lights painted my cobalt blue Rolls-Royce like a crime scene. Neighbors stood frozen on their lawns, mouths open, as Margaret, the HOA president from hell, smirked from her porch like she'd just won. Moments earlier, I was sipping coffee in my driveway. Now, two officers were telling me I was under arrest for property theft of my own car. It was all part of her plan, and she thought she had me cornered. But what she didn't know, this wasn't the beginning of my downfall. It was the start of her destruction. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how it all went down. Before we dive in, make sure you hit subscribe and tap that bell icon so you don't miss a single second of this unbelievable HOA war. It started on a cool autumn morning, the kind where the sky is painted in soft gold and the neighborhood seems almost too perfect to be real. Mia and I had only been in Oakview Heights for 3 days, just enough time to stack moving boxes in the garage and pretend we were settled. The community looked like it had been plucked straight out of a luxury real estate ad. Identical white fences, manicured lawns that all seemed to be cut at exactly the same height, and neighbors who waved like they'd been rehearsing in front of a mirror. That morning, while sipping my coffee on the porch, I spotted a cream-colored envelope tucked under the doormat. The thick paper was embossed with the Oakview Heights logo in gold, like it was inviting me to join some exclusive club. Inside was a neatly folded letter, written in the kind of elegant cursive you only see on wedding invitations. Welcome to the neighborhood. Please review the enclosed rules and regulations to ensure a harmonious living environment. Attached was a 47-page booklet of community guidelines. I flipped through it half-interested, expecting the usual suburban commandments. No blaring music after 10 p.m. Keep your trash cans hidden. Mow your lawn regularly. But halfway through, a single line caught my attention. All exterior property changes, including but not limited to vehicle appearance, driveway use, and parking, must be approved by the HOA board. I frowned. It didn't seem like a big deal, at least not for me. My Aston Martin DB11 wasn't some neon-wrapped, flame-spitting beast. It was a sleek, midnight black coupe that looked like a sculpture on wheels. My one indulgence, the prize for years of grinding at my software company until success finally caught up with me. I thought nothing more of it until she appeared. I was in the driveway that afternoon, giving the DB11 a gentle polish, when I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of my property. A woman stood there, her posture stiff as a fence post, her short blonde curls framing a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. She was holding a clipboard tight against her chest, as if it were a shield. Her eyes weren't just looking at the car, they were inspecting it, dissecting it. "Beautiful car," she said at last, though the way her voice dripped with suspicion made it sound less like admiration and more like a warning. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment the real story began. The woman with the clipboard didn't introduce herself at first. She just stood there, her gaze darting from my car to the HOA booklet she seemed to have memorized. The silence between us stretched until it started to feel like a test I didn't know I was taking. Finally, she tilted her head in a way that was both polite and faintly condescending. "I'm Margaret Holbrook," she said, pronouncing her name like it should mean something to me. "President of the Oakview Heights Homeowners Association." There it was, the title that explained everything. I gave her a cordial nod, careful not to let my skepticism show. "Nice to meet you. I'm Ethan Ward. My wife Mia and I just moved in a few days ago." Her lips curved into the faintest approximation of a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, we're all aware. I like to welcome new residents personally and make sure they're aware of the community's standards." Her eyes flicked toward the DB11 again, lingering on the gleaming bodywork. "That's quite a vehicle you have there. We have very specific guidelines regarding driveway use and visible property." I set the microfiber cloth down, already sensing where this was going. "It's parked in my driveway, not blocking anyone's access. Is there a problem?" Margaret glanced at her clipboard as if to double-check her. "Ammunition. Vehicles of a luxury or exotic nature are subject to review by the HOA board. We like to maintain a sense of uniformity here. Certain styles can be distracting." I almost laughed, thinking she was joking, but her stone-faced expression killed the impulse. So you're saying my car is too nice for the neighborhood? Her expression didn't change. I'm saying it may not align with the aesthetic values we've established. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I had moved to Oakview Heights for peace, a fresh start after years in a city where noise never stopped and neighborly interaction was a foreign concept. But the way Margaret spoke told me I wasn't dealing with a friendly neighbor. This was a gatekeeper, a ruler in a kingdom I'd accidentally stepped into. Margaret, I said evenly, this car is fully legal, registered, and paid for. It's not loud, it's not unsafe, and it's on my property. Unless there's a law against it, I don't see a problem. She made a note on her clipboard, the scratching of her pen sounding far louder than it should have. I'll take this to the board. You'll be notified of our decision. And just like that, she turned and walked away, leaving a trail of unspoken threats in her wake. Mia came outside a few minutes later, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. Who was that? HOA president, I said. Apparently my car might be too nice for Oakview Heights. She blinked, then laughed. A short, incredulous sound. That's ridiculous. It's a car, Ethan. Who cares? Margaret does, I said. And I have a feeling she's not going to drop it. Over the next few days, I started noticing Margaret's presence everywhere. She'd be across the street chatting with a neighbor, her eyes flicking toward my driveway every few seconds. She'd slow her walk when passing our house, subtly checking the car's position, condition, even whether I'd left it uncovered. Then the letters began. The first was a friendly reminder about HOA regulations. The second was an official notice requesting that I submit a NASO, Vehicle Visibility Request Form, for board approval. By the third, the tone had shifted. It warned that failure to comply could result in daily fines. Mia thought it was absurd, and I agreed, but something told me that simply ignoring Margaret would only escalate things. People like her didn't back down when ignored. They doubled down. So I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. If this was going to turn into a battle, I wanted to see exactly what I was up against. The community center where the HOA meetings were held looked harmless enough from the outside. Just a squat brick building with neatly trimmed hedges and a welcome sign by the door. But the moment I stepped inside, I realized this wasn't going to be some friendly neighborhood gathering. The room was set up like a miniature courtroom. A long table stretched across the front, behind which sat 5 people. The board, with Margaret in the center like a queen on her throne. Folding chairs faced the table in tight, perfect rows, and nearly every seat was filled. Residents murmured quietly among themselves, the conversations punctuated by the occasional glance in my direction. My arrival didn't go unnoticed. Margaret tapped her gavel lightly, calling the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. We have several items to address tonight, including a matter of vehicle aesthetics. Her eyes slid toward me like a spotlight. Mr. Ward, would you care to join us at the front? I walked up, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on me. Standing in front of the board, I suddenly understood the dynamic here. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. Margaret gestured toward me. Mr. Ward has recently acquired property within Oakview Heights and has brought with him a Rolls-Royce DB11. She said the name like it was an exotic disease. Our community prides itself on uniformity, and while we appreciate fine automobile, certain vehicles may disrupt the harmony we work so hard to maintain. I kept my voice calm. With respect, my car is parked legally on my property. It's quiet, well-maintained, and doesn't interfere with anyone's enjoyment of their home. I'm struggling to see the issue here. One of the board members, a balding man with glasses, leaned forward. The issue, Mr. Ward, is precedent. If we allow your car, what's next? Lamborghinis? Monster trucks? We have guidelines for a reason. The room murmured in agreement, though I could see a few skeptical faces in the crowd. Guidelines, I repeated, aren't laws, and these guidelines seem subjective. What exactly is the metric for a vehicle being too disruptive? Margaret's smile tightened. We don't need a specific metric. The board votes on these matters, and the decision is binding. I looked around the room, then back at her. So basically, if you decide you don't like something, it's banned? That's one way of putting it, she said smoothly. Something in me bristled. This wasn't about the car anymore. It was about whether or not I was willing to be pushed around. I glanced at the audience, noting a few people shifting uncomfortably. They'd seen this before, I realized. Maybe they'd been on the receiving end of it too. All right, I said, my voice steady. Let's vote then. Margaret's smile deepened like she thought she'd already won. She raised her hand. All in favor of requiring Mr. Ward to remove his vehicle from visible view? 3 hands shot up instantly. The fourth board member hesitated, glancing around, then slowly raised theirs. Only one remained down. Motion passes, Margaret announced. Mr. Ward, you have 7 days to comply. I nodded once, not giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. Understood. I turned and walked back to my seat, feeling every eye follow me. As I sat down, Mia leaned in and whispered, "So what now?" I kept my eyes forward. "Now," I murmured, "we play by their rules. For now." Because I'd just decided, if they wanted a war over a car, I was going to give them one they'd never forget. The first 3 days after that meeting were quiet. Too quiet. I could tell Margaret expected me to either cave quickly or explode in some public display she could use against me. But instead, I gave her nothing. I kept the Rolls-Royce right in the driveway, washed to perfection, polished until it looked like liquid metal in the sun. Every time I walked past it, I imagined her peeking through her blinds, fuming at the sight. On the 4th day, the first notice of violation showed up in my mailbox. The letter was printed on official HOA stationery and written in language so pompous it felt like satire. It listed my failure to comply and stated that I would be fined $250 per day starting on the 8th day. It ended with a thinly veiled threat about legal action and possible lien placement if the fines went unpaid. I read it twice, then smiled. This was exactly the move I had hoped for. Margaret was so used to people backing down that she had no idea what to do with someone who wasn't afraid of a paper tiger. That evening, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and began digging. The HOA's bylaws, meeting minutes, financial disclosures, everything that was legally required to be public record. The deeper I went, the more I realized Margaret had been running this place like her personal kingdom for years. She'd pushed through amendments without proper votes, issued fines with no documented basis, and paid contractors suspiciously high fees for landscaping that half the neighborhood claimed never happened. But the real gold mine came when I found the community's annual budget report. In the miscellaneous expenses category, over $15,000 was unaccounted for. No receipts, no descriptions, just a vague line item app, roved by the board. The plan began to form in my mind. I didn't need to just win my case. I needed to pull the curtain back and show everyone exactly how Margaret ran Oakview Heights. The next morning, I started small. I went on the neighborhood forum, the same one Margaret used to post passive-aggressive reminders about lawn height, and made a friendly post. "Hey neighbors, does anyone know exactly what the HOA's process is for approving expenditures? Been reading through the budget report and I'm a little confused by the miscellaneous category. Happy to hear from anyone who knows more." Within hours, the thread blew up. People chimed in with questions of their own. A few shared stories of odd fines and unexplained rule changes. By the end of the day, there were over 50 comments, and the conversation had clearly shifted from my car to the bigger picture. That night, as Mia and I sat on the porch, I saw Margaret's SUV drive past slowly, her eyes flicking toward me before snapping back to the road. "She knows," Mia said quietly. "Good," I replied. "Let her sweat." Because now, I wasn't just some guy with a fancy car. I was the crack in the dam, and once it broke, there'd be no stopping the flood. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, a quick update on landscaping schedules, a reminder about the upcoming neighborhood block party. But by the time the second item on the agenda came up, it was clear this would be anything but routine. The clubhouse was packed. Usually these meetings drew maybe 10 people, tops. That night, I counted at least 40. People who hadn't shown up in years were there, sitting forward in their chairs, eyes locked on the front table where Margaret presided like a monarch on her throne. When the floor opened for questions, I stood up slowly. The tension in the room was thick, like static before a lightning strike. "Margaret," I began, holding up a printed copy of the HOA's annual budget, "I was hoping you could help clarify something for me. This line here, miscellaneous expenses, $15,000, What exactly did that money go toward? Her smile was tight, brittle at the edges. Those are operational expenses that don't fit neatly into other categories, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I tilted my head. Right, but the bylaws require itemized receipts for all expenditures, and I didn't see any attached to this report. So I'm just wondering, where's the documentation? The murmurs started immediately. People shifted in their seats, whispering to their neighbors. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Mr. Collins, the board handles financial matters internally. If you have a specific concern, you may submit it in writing for review. I let the silence hang for a moment before responding. Oh, I have, but I've also filed a request with the county auditor's office. They'll be reviewing the HOA's financials next month. That hit its mark. Her jaw tightened, and she moved to shut me down, but it was too late. The room had shifted. Hands went up all over. Questions about contractor fees, about fines, about where the money was going. Margaret tried to control the narrative, but every answer she gave seemed to dig her deeper. At one point, an elderly neighbor named Helen, who had lived here for 30 years, stood and said, "You've been running this place like it's your personal piggy bank. We're done being afraid of you." The air crackled with something I hadn't seen here before. Open defiance. By the time the meeting ended, Margaret's composure was gone. She avoided looking at me as she gathered her papers, but I caught the slightest tremor in her hands. When I got home, Mia met me at the door. "How bad was it?" she asked. I grinned. "Let's just say the dam's starting to crack." But I knew better than to underestimate her. Margaret wasn't the type to take a hit and retreat. No, the next move would be hers. And something told me it was going to be ugly. The ugly came faster than I expected. 2 days after the meeting, I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on my front door. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor, or even the sharp rap of an impatient delivery driver. This was deliberate, aggressive, like the person on the other side wanted me to feel every thud in my chest. When I opened the door, there were two men standing there in matching navy windbreakers with HOA enforcement stitched in gold across the back. They weren't security guards. We didn't have security guards. These were volunteers, Margaret's self-appointed compliance officers, and they both looked like they'd been waiting for this moment all week. "Mr. Collins," one of them said, holding up a clipboard, "we're here to perform an inspection of your property. We've received several complaints about violations." I didn't move from the doorway. "Complaints from who?" "I'm not at liberty to say," he replied. His eyes flicked to the driveway where my car sat gleaming in the morning light. "But the board takes these matters seriously. We'll need to walk the perimeter." I crossed my arms. "Not without a court order, you won't." The second man smirked. "If you refuse inspection, we can issue daily fines until the violations are corrected." That was Margaret's game. Bleed me dry with fines until I either bent to her will or moved out. But she underestimated one thing. I'd already been in touch with a lawyer. "Tell Margaret," I said evenly, "that any further harassment will be documented and forwarded to my attorney. And if either of you steps onto my property without legal authorization, I'll consider it trespassing." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the first man scribbled something on his clipboard and turned away. An hour later, I checked the HOA's online portal and saw a notice in my account. Violation, unauthorized vihajimas, modifications. The fine was set at $500, effective immediately. The modifications in question, a custom chrome trim I'd had installed months before, a trim Margaret had previously complimented at a neighborhood barbecue. That afternoon, Helen called. "She's doing it to everyone who spoke up at the meeting," she said. "Fence violations, lawn height, trash cans left out a minute too long. It's a witch hunt." And it was working. People were scared. I could feel the momentum from the meeting slipping away as neighbors began to retreat into the safety of silence. That night, Mia and I sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out between us, the budget printouts, the bylaw handbook, screenshots of online notices. She leaned forward, eyes bright. "If she wants to play dirty," Mia said, "then we dig deeper. Find the thing she can't explain away, the thing that makes her untouchable in the worst possible way." I looked at her, a slow smile spreading across my face. "You're thinking like me now." We stayed up until nearly 2 a.m., cross-referencing contractor invoices against county permit records. And that's when we found it. A landscaping contract for $28,000 paid to a company that didn't exist. This wasn't just misuse of HOA funds. This was fraud. And if we played it right, it was the beginning of the end for Margaret. The deeper I dug into that landscaping contract, the stranger it became. On paper, the $28,000 had been paid for aesthetic perimeter enhancements along the community's eastern border. Supposedly, this was to improve security and property value. But when Mia and I drove to that side of Magnolia Ridge, there was nothing. No new hedges, no flower beds, not even a freshly turned patch of soil. The only thing there was a worn, chain-link fence that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I ran the contractor's name, Green Horizons Landscaping LLC, through the state's business registry. Nothing. Not dissolved, not inactive, not misspelled. It simply didn't exist. It was a ghost company, and Margaret had signed the payment authorization herself. Helen's voice cracked over the phone when I told her. If that's true, she could go to prison. HOA board members are held personally responsible for misuse of funds. Exactly, I said, and that's why we need proof she can't wiggle out of. The problem was, the HOA kept all paper invoices and receipts locked in a filing cabinet in the clubhouse office, and the only people with keys were Margaret and her vice president, a nervous man named Paul, who treated her like she was royalty. So I waited for my opportunity. It came on a Tuesday afternoon when I noticed Margaret's white Lexus pulling out of her driveway while I was mowing my lawn. She was dressed to the nines. No way she was coming back soon. I texted Helen, now. We met at the clubhouse 10 minutes later. Helen, who was the treasurer before Margaret stacked the board with her friends, still had her old key. She handed it to me like it was a loaded gun. 5 minutes, in and out. The clubhouse smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. We slipped into the office, and there it was, the beige, dented filing cabinet that held the HOA's secrets. Helen shut us at the door behind us and kept watch while I knelt down and started flipping through manila folders. Invoices, receipts, maintenance logs, and then there it was. Green Horizons Landscaping, LLC. The invoice was almost laughable. Generic, no logo, no contact information, just a line item and an amount, $28,000. And stapled to it was a copy of a check, signed in Margaret's bold, looping handwriting. I pulled out my phone and took photos of everything, every invoice, every suspicious check, every scrap of paper that might tell the story. We were about to leave when I spotted something else. A second folder labeled Special Projects. Inside were receipts for thousands of dollars worth of security services, all billed to the HOA but provided by a company I recognized instantly. It was owned by Margaret's cousin. By the time we left, my phone had over 100 photos. Evidence of embezzlement, nepotism, and fraud. As we stepped out into the fading sunlight, Helen exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. You realize she's going to come for you now, right? I smiled. Good. Let her. Because now I wasn't just defending my property. I was about to burn down her entire kingdom. 2 days later, the storm hit. I was sipping my morning coffee when I noticed a white envelope wedged in my mailbox. No postage, no return address, just my name in thick black ink. That's never a good sign. Inside was a letter on official HOA letterhead accusing me of multiple violations of community standards, including unapproved modifications to property and unlawful entry into HOA facilities. The closing line was the kicker. Failure to remedy these violations within 7 days will result in legal action. I knew exactly what this was. A preemptive strike. Margaret had figured out someone had been in the office, and her gut told her it was me. But instead of confronting me directly, she was playing it smart. If she could get me tangled in a legal mess, maybe I'd be too busy, or too broke, to go after her. Mia was furious. She's threatening to sue us? For what? Having a lawn chair that's not HOA approved? Not exactly, I said. She's trying to scare us off, which means she knows we're close. The trick now was to hit back without showing my full hand. If I went public too early, she could spin it as a smear campaign. If I waited too long, she could destroy or hide more evidence. That evening, I reached out to Derek, the guy with the wind chimes and the unofficial mayor of our street. Derek had lived here for 20 years and knew every board member, past and present. Over beers in his garage, I showed him some of the photos I'd taken. "Holy hell," he muttered. "You've got her dead to rights, but you can't just dump this on Facebook, man. She's got friends in the county office. You post this, she'll have it taken down before anyone sees it. What do you suggest?" "Two things," he said. "First, get these documents notarized. That way she can't claim they're fake. Second, find someone outside the HOA who hates her guts enough to leak it. Someone with no direct connection to you. That way, it's not your crusade, it's just news." The next day, I did exactly that. I found a notary in town, a retired teacher who listened wide-eyed as I explained the situation. She stamped every single photo and affidavit I prepared. Now, they were official. For the leak, I had just the person in mind, Helen's niece, Sophie, a local podcaster who specialized in small-town corruption stories. She had a following big enough to get attention, but wasn't so famous that Margaret would notice her immediately. I handed Sophie a flash drive with everything on it. "Don't say where you got it," I told her. "Just make sure it gets out." She grinned. "Oh, it'll get out, and once it's out, it's not going back in." That night, as Mia and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, I had the strange feeling of calm before a battle. The air was heavy, still. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower coughed to life, then died again. I knew Margaret wouldn't wait long to make her next move, but this time, I wouldn't be playing defense. This time, I'd be dictating the terms. The war wasn't just coming. I was bringing it to her doorstep. Sophie didn't waste any time. 2 days later, her podcast feed lit up with a new episode titled "The HOA Queenpin of Magnolia Ridge." From the very first second, she hooked listeners with her smooth, deliberate tone. What if I told you the person who's supposed to protect your neighborhood from corruption is the corruption? Today, we peel back the pristine, manicured lawns of Magnolia Ridge and see what's rotting underneath. Then came the bombshells. Notarized copies of invoices showing HOA funds routed to Margaret's personal accounts. Video stills of her moving boxes out of the HOA office in the dead of night. And the kicker, the yacht slip reservation at a marina 2 counties away. By the time the episode ended, Sophie's inbox was flooded with tips from other neighborhoods, all claiming they'd been burned by her in the past. She'd never just been Margaret from Magnolia Ridge. She was Margaret, the serial HOA president, hopping from one community to another, milking each until the board caught on, then moving on before she could be prosecuted. And just like Derek predicted, the wildfire spread. I woke up the next morning to find neighbors whispering in driveways, people in golf carts stopping mid-round to huddle and check their phones. Someone taped a printout of Sophie's podcast logo to the HOA notice board right over Margaret's photo. Margaret, of course, went into damage control. She sent out a mass email calling the podcast baseless defamation and accusing certain residents, gee, wonder who, of conspiring to destroy her hard-earned reputation. But the cracks were showing. The treasurer resigned for personal reasons. The secretary suddenly stopped answering her phone. Even the head of security, who'd once chased me off HOA property, avoided eye contact at the gate. Still, I knew better than to celebrate early. Cornered animals bite the hardest, and Margaret had been cornered before. She'd survived it by turning the tables, making herself the victim. That afternoon, a manila envelope appeared on my porch. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a legal summons. Margaret was suing me for defamation and harassment. Court date, 2 weeks. Mia stared at it in disbelief. "She's suing you? After everything she's done?" "That's how she plays," I said. "She wants to put me on trial so no one looks too closely at her." But here's the thing Margaret didn't know. My trial could be her trial too. Because discovery works both ways. And if she wanted to drag me into a courtroom, she was about to walk in there with every skeleton from her HOA closet rattling at her heels. The legal summons lay on my kitchen table like a coiled snake. Its language was cold, impersonal, and threatening all at once. A formal declaration that I was now the accused. Defamation, harassment, damages in excess of $75,000. Margaret didn't just want to shut me up, she wanted to bleed me dry. Mia paced the length of the kitchen, her arms folded so tightly I thought she might cut off her own circulation. She's doing this to scare you. If she can't win in the court of public opinion, she'll try to win in the real one. I didn't respond immediately. I was staring at the summons, but what I really saw was her smug smile the last time we locked eyes. She thought this was checkmate. The problem for Margaret was simple. She'd underestimated me. Again. See, most people fold when they get legal papers. They panic, call their insurance, maybe take down a Facebook post or two, and hope it all goes away. But I knew something Margaret didn't seem to realize. In court, the truth is admissible. And truth was the one thing I had in abundance. Step one was finding the right lawyer. I called up an old college friend, Mark Jennings, who had since become a bulldog of a civil litigator. I still remembered him from debate club. Relentless, methodical, and with a knack for cornering opponents until they admitted defeat just to escape his cross-examination. Mark didn't even hesitate after I gave him the basics. She's suing you for defamation? Good. That means I can request discovery, financial records, emails, phone logs, meeting minutes. If she's hiding something, and I'm betting she is, we'll drag it out into the light. We set a meeting for the next morning at his downtown office. Meanwhile, I went into full evidence-gathering mode. Every email Margaret had ever sent me, every HOA meeting recording, every photo of her bogus security patrols harassing residents. I organized them into folders, backed them up twice, and printed hard copies just in case. The more I dug, the more I realized Margaret had left a trail of breadcrumbs so wide it could be seen from space. There were invoices with vague descriptions like consulting fee paid to shell companies, HOA checks written to cash, and even a reimbursement request for security equipment that never materialized. And that was before I even looked into her personal spending. Public property records showed she'd purchased a small condo in Florida last year, paid in full, no mortgage. Yet somehow she'd reported only a modest retirement income on her HOA filings. The math didn't add up unless the missing funds from our community budget had taken a little detour south. By the time I finished my preliminary research, my dining table looked like a crime scene investigation board. Papers fanned out, sticky notes marking key points, red pen circles connecting dates and amounts. That night I barely slept, not because I was nervous, but because my mind was racing ahead, imagining Margaret's face when she realized she had opened the wrong door. She'd invited me into the one arena where lies could be dismantled piece by piece under oath, with the entire neighborhood, maybe even the media, watching. When dawn broke, I was ready. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about putting Margaret exactly where she belonged, on the defensive, exposed, and powerless, for the first time in years. As I slid the growing stack of evidence into my briefcase, I smiled to myself. Margaret thought she'd put me in handcuffs, but all she'd really done was hand me the keys to hers. Mark's office was exactly what I expected. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and an entire wall lined with thick law books that looked like they'd never lost a fight. He shook my hand firmly, then gestured toward a seat across from his desk. "Let's go over everything," he said, pulling a yellow legal pad closer. I unloaded my briefcase onto his desk. Folders, USB drives, printed screenshots, even a couple of manila envelopes full of meeting transcripts. He raised an eyebrow. "You've been busy." "Margaret's been busier," I said, "but she's not as careful as she thinks she is." We went through the material piece by piece. Mark's pen moved fast, scribbling notes, connecting dots, jotting dates and references. When I mentioned the mysterious Florida condo purchase, he paused mid-sentence and looked up. "Do you have proof of ownership?" I slid a printed copy of the property record across the desk. "Paid in cash. Bought last year. No mortgage, no logical source of income to cover it." Mark's grin was slow and sharp. "If that's HOA money, she's in deep. We'll subpoena bank records and follow the trail. But first," he tapped the defamation suit paperwork, "we need to hit her back hard. Counterclaim, abuse of process, W. You argue this lawsuit is retaliatory and meant to silence a whistleblower. Judges hate that. The meeting lasted 2 hours, but it felt like 10 minutes. By the time we wrapped up, we had a strategy. Mark would file a motion for discovery immediately, which meant Margaret would be legally obligated to hand over documents she'd probably rather burn. I'd continue digging on my end, gathering witness statements from neighbors who'd experienced her intimidation firsthand. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek, the guy with the wind chimes. "You've seen the HOA Facebook page today?" I hadn't, but when I opened it, I nearly laughed out loud. Margaret had posted a long-winded community update claiming she was taking necessary legal action to protect the integrity of Magnolia Ridge from malicious slander and disruptive behavior. The comment section was pure chaos. Half the neighbors were backing her up, but the other half, the ones who'd quietly suffered under her rule, were speaking up for the first time. "I've had enough of her games," one person wrote. "She fined me $100 for leaving my trash bin out 15 minutes too long." Another chimed in. "Security harassed my daughter for walking home from school. Enough is enough." It was like a dam had cracked. People who'd been too afraid to speak were suddenly emboldened. The lawsuit hadn't scared them. It had enraged them. By the time I pulled into my driveway, 3 more neighbors had texted me, offering to share their stories with my lawyer. It wasn't just my fight anymore. The neighborhood was waking up. That night, Mia and I sat on the back porch, listening to the distant sound of cicadas. She rested her head on my shoulder. "You know she's going to come at you harder now," she murmured. "I'm counting on it," I said. Because the more Margaret swung, the more she exposed herself, and soon she'd swing at the wrong thing, and her whole empire would come crashing down. The next morning, Mark called with news that made my coffee taste even better. "Discovery is in motion," he said. "She has 30 days to produce everything we've requested. Bank statements, HOA meeting minutes, contracts, you name it. If she hides anything, that's a separate violation." 30 days. That was all I needed. 30 days to take every skeleton in Margaret's closet and line them up for the entire neighborhood, maybe even the evening news, to see. What Margaret didn't realize was that this wasn't just going to be a court case. It was going to be a spectacle. The 30 days passed faster than I expected, but not fast enough for Margaret. Each week brought another leak, a shady vendor contract here, a suspicious transfer there, until her once loyal supporters stopped defending her in the HOA group. The final blow came 2 days before the deadline, when Mark received a file anonymously dropped at his office, a scanned ledger, handwritten in Margaret's own script, showing thousands of dollars reallocated for personal use. That night, I watched from my driveway as 2 unmarked cars pulled up to Margaret's house. She stood on her porch in a silk robe, shouting something no one could hear, while 2 officers calmly led her to the back seat. The wind chimes on Derek's porch tinkled like applause. The lawsuit? Dismissed with prejudice. Our counterclaim? Settled in our favor, with Margaret barred from holding any HOA position again. The neighborhood didn't just breathe a sigh of relief, it celebrated. Lawn chairs and barbecue pits lined the cul-de-sac for an impromptu block party. A week later, I rolled the Spectre out of the garage, its cobalt blue paint catching the afternoon sun. Mia climbed in beside me, smiling like the weight of a year had just lifted. As we drove past Derek's house, he raised his beer in a silent toast. The gates of Magnolia Ridge were open. The road ahead was clear. We were free.